Hey everyone, and welcome to the Kodakery. I'm Megan.
And I'm Josh.
Bill Pope ASC is our guest this week. Bill is a cinematographer extraordinaire who has crafted some of the most exhilarating action and adventure films in history. Most recently, Bill has worked on Baby Driver. He shared some great stories about what it took to pull off high-speed car chases, why he continues to work with Edgar Wright, and about what differentiates film from digital. So, let's jump into the Kodakery and talk with Bill.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Kodakery. Today in the Kodakery we have with us Bill Pope, ASC. Bill is a cinematography legend who has directed some of the greatest action-adventure films of our time. I'm talking about The Matrix, Spider-Man 2. I can't not mention Army of Darkness. And of course his collaborations with Edgar Wright, which is what we're here to talk about today. Bill, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So, Bill, this isn't the first time that you've collaborated with Edgar Wright. You worked on The World's End, and of course, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. What is it that brings you back to working with Edgar?
Edgar just sent me a poster the other day that said, "This is our third baby together." that's the way he signed it, and I was like, "Ooh."
So this was the last time you were working with Edgar.
In true Edgar fashion. He likes to push the envelope. Edgar came by to visit on the set of Spider-Man 2 or 3, I can't remember. He knows Sam, how, I don't know, socially probably. And he came by and Sam introduced me, and I said, "Edgar Wright, I know who Edgar Wright is. He did Spaced, and he did Shaun of the Dead." And Edgar was like, "No way, you've seen Spaced," because this was, 2006 or so, and Spaced only appeared on your laptop. But my daughter had turned me on to Spaced, so I watched the whole thing. Then I watched Shaun of the Dead. So I think Edgar just sort of clocked that. He has a incredible, legendary memory, Edgar. I don't know if you've ever interviewed him, but it's. I did a commentary. We did a commentary together the other day, and I walked in and I said, "How's it going with Edgar?" And the operators looked at me and said, "He has the most amazing memory of anybody we've ever seen. He requires no notes and remembers every single person's." And I was like, "Hey, wow. Welcome to my world. I can't even remember my name, and I have to work with Edgar." And he's like, "Can't you remember anything?" "No, I can't remember anything, Edgar. I'm sorry." Anyway, so Edgar, years later, he was mounting Scott Pilgrim, though I didn't know this. He just said, "Let's go to lunch. I want to ask you some questions about cinematography." And so I went to lunch, and he asked me a bunch of questions, and I said, "That was fun." And then, like a month later, so let's go. I got some more questions, and we went to another lunch. And then we went to another lunch, and they're all fun. Edgar's incredibly charming, and his knowledge of cinema is encyclopedic, and he's just an incredible, fun time. And then I was like, "What's going on?"
What are we doing here?
This feels like a trap. Is this a trap?
It's like, is there a reason for this? It's like, not that I love to have a new friend and so forth, but he said, "I'm thinking about doing this." I realized I was being interviewed, laboriously over the course of 6 months. He's a very careful person, Edgar. And then we went off to he said, "I want to shoot a proof of concept of Scott Pilgrim." He gave me the script. I read it. It's fantastic, of course. And I want to shoot a proof of concept. I'm still not hired. So we go off to Toronto, and we shoot 3 days of incredibly at Edgar's legendary pace, which usually reduces most people to babbling idiots. But I love to go fast, and I love to figure things out before you're there and just crank, and be open for inspiration and fun. And we had a blast. We just cranked for 3 days. We had to put the crew in the hospital afterwards, but
we got the job.
And after that, suddenly I realized I'm hired. There were never any official hiring. Suddenly I'm going to Toronto to shoot the movie. It's like,
That sounds very relaxed.
Yeah.
it's very relaxed, but super intense. And then we did at that pace for I think 108 days maybe on Scott Pilgrim, and then we did World's End, which if I had to guess, I'd say maybe 80 days. And then we did this movie, which probably 55 days, I think, for this one.
Is that uncommon, or does it really just vary from film to film? Is 55 like pretty short?
55 is pretty short. The studio, it was meant to be 60. The studio decided we didn't need 5 days. So they're always very cost conscious on this one. So the week before we started, they cut 5 days out of the schedule, which even at 60, we were really having a tough time fitting everything inside the bag. But at 55, Edgar made some token promises that he would cut some stuff, but that's never going to happen. So the directors don't cut things. So we just fit the same amount in a much smaller bag.
I don't know. I would think it would raise the pressure a little bit, especially with a movie that has like a lot of stunts and car chases and stuff like that. Did it?
There was enormous pressure on this one.
Yeah.
And I think, Scott Pilgrim underperformed, and I've never quite been able to figure out quite why. The only thing I can think about is it was a tough sell, and the ad department never quite figured out how to do it. What is Scott Pilgrim really? It's a rock and roll superhero movie. It's like, is it a comedy? Is it adventure? It's really, Edgar's always doing a mashup of genres, so it's really hard to figure out what his movies are. If you look at World's End, it starts out as a relationship movie about an alcoholic who's going back to work out his life and with his friends and so forth, and it ends up being about aliens. At page 40,
right.
Maybe it was even page 60. It was like I remember reading the script and going, "What the heck?" It's like, this is really good, and then suddenly I'm completely in. This has never happened to me before. The movie just took a massive left turn, but it makes them hard to sell because you don't really know. The audience is like, which one is it?
Right.
They like to know. Once they get in, I think they're really happy to have somebody expand their horizons, but getting their butts in the seats is really hard. Coming into this one, we felt the pressure of the last two, and then there was then our aborted take on Ant-Man, which we just could not seem to get along with Marvel at all, and we both just walked or ankled, as Variety used to call it, and so there was that pressure. There's enormous pressure on Edgar to perform on this one. So cutting those 5 days right before we were going was like, oh my God.
Good start.
And with one hand tied behind your back.
Right.
Oh, and here's a blindfold.
Right. Just to make sure it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, full disclosure, Josh nor I have seen Baby Driver yet. We're very excited to see it. And in case we haven't mentioned, and we'll mention again, comes out on June 28th, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we learned about in researching was that the soundtrack was really important to all of his films, but particularly this one. And so we were wondering how that affected you as the cinematographer. We heard that the actors got thumb drives of the soundtrack and they were listening. Were you doing the same?
Oh, yeah. When he delivers the script, he delivers a thumb drive. So you read the scenes listening to the music.
That's pretty cool.
I think the actors was even more connected somehow. He sent it to them as a file, and as you read it on your laptop, it was playing the music. I think it was all integrated.
That is
Whereas
awesome.
mine, I got a thumb drive and I pressed the buttons and listened to it as I was
Right.
reading it.
Okay.
He picked the songs first. Over years, he's picked the songs. So this would be a good song for this sort of scene. This would be a good song for this sort of scene. This would be a good song for this sort of scene. And then he wrote the scenes and started fitting the film around it. And things gestate with Edgar over long periods of time. And then he sort of strikes like a cobra He's there.
So when you're planning these scenes out, a lot of the scenes are actually in time with the music, correct? So how does that get done? And when you're doing like a car chase, an action sequence, is some of that editing, or is it timed out as you're shooting?
Well, of course, it's different for different things. Almost all of it has to do with editing, of course. But within a shot, oftentimes there are things that have to be timed out just within the shot or within a sequence. You'll see there's an opening bank robbery sequence in which everything is done to music, but you can see that pretty much everybody's action is on the cut, except for Babies, who is performing to the song inside the car as his co-workers are robbing the bank. He's outside in the car actually performing the song. And he's singing it and doing all the he's playing all the instruments, air playing, and he's turning the windshield wipers on and off, and the windshield wipers are moving to the beat. Cars are going by on the beat. Passers-by are looking at him on the beat. Everything's happening on the beat, most of which can happen on the edit, but he's wearing a wig, and we are having an earwig, and we have speakers on the set so that he knows, when to wave, when to turn the wipers on, when to, all that stuff. There's several scenes in which windshield wipers move to the beat, and then they move double time, so we had to have somebody in the trunk of the car with a windshield wiper controls. That was another glamorous film job. There's several shootouts, and most shots are cut on the beat, but there will be, Jamie Foxx or John Hamm or Asa will be firing the weapons, bap, 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 and they've memorized the song, and the gunfire is probably drowning out the music to them. So there's a choreographer there counting out the beats and saying now, with the baton almost. So everything's on the beat, and whatever Edgar's deeply into switch pans on the beat and switch pans in on the beat and camera moves on the beat, and all that has to be choreographed and thought about. And so the camera operators get the songs, the lighting people who are flashing the lights, they get the songs. Everybody's memorized these songs. So
that's pretty cool. Everybody's on the same page.
It's really great. I don't know if you remember Day for Night. I suddenly flashed on Day for Night. I don't know if you ever saw the Truffaut movie, but there's a love poem in the middle of it. Two people walking through the forest, having an intimate scene, and Truffaut pulls back, and you see the camera operators moving. They're being dollied along, and the grips are trying to step on the same beats that the actors are walking on, so that their footprints are not crushing leaves over the soundtrack. And you pull back, and the sound people are walking on the same way, and the script supervisors walking the same way. The directors creeping by in the same way on this forest thing, and you see the incredible choreography that a crew goes through to capture a simple walk and talk through a forest. And it's just a poem about how a crew suddenly becomes one, and everybody's pulling with all their might. They're rowing the boat together to get this thing done. And Edgar just amps that up to a whole another level. It's like it's much more sophisticated than just everybody walking on the same football. It's the same sort of feeling. When you're doing it, you just feel completely exhilarated.
I bet.
It's why I've always asked for operators I always consider operators and dolly grips to be part actor. They have to be able to interact with the actors themselves and feel the drama, and because the actors are never going to do it twice the same way. So you just have to feel it. You have to be one with them. So that's one of my favorite things about movies. The theatrical moments like that.
That's cool.
No, it's really one of the things that we hear a lot about is when you're using film on a set. So you shot this on film. I know that you've shot a variety of different things, but does film impact the set in a similar way where it potentially, like we've heard from other cinematographers and directors where they're like, film really kind of helps keep people on point because you're not shooting endlessly and things like that. I mean, what are your experiences?
Exactly right. Mm-hmm. It's just a discipline. It's just, the magazine can last 10 minutes long. You get, the slate comes in fast. Everybody's on their toes. Everybody's, it becomes sort of flaccid in the digital world. Everybody's like, it becomes a millennial picture where everybody's, they think about, they're on their phone, they're like whatever. On film, it's a complete old-fashioned discipline. You have to, it's got to be in the can, it's got to be split off, it's got to go to the lab, it's got to be returned. It's like everything's got a deadline to it and a precision to it that people step up to.
Right.
I've watched the discipline fade over the years, but it's not hard to start it up again. And when people get into it, they're into it.
That's great.
And when you're doing a film like we've just talked about, like these extremely intricate, complicated scenes, how are you selecting the right film to use for some of these action scenes, car chase scenes? You've got all of this complexity through it. Does it factor into how you're planning your shots and which ones you're doing when and all that kind of stuff?
You're talking about film stocks?
Yeah.
In this one, I knew I would be shooting at many different frame rates and in many different lights. And I wanted sort of grain continuity, so I chose the fastest stock that Kodak makes and went with it throughout. There was a few times when I would use a slower daylight stock just in cameras mounted on the sides of cars and so forth, where I didn't want filters in front. I didn't want any flare from filters. I'd stick some daylight stock in there. But ordinarily, I was shooting all with 52-19, so I have enough speed to deal with polarizers and overcranking and you're driving along these roads. You go underneath a bridge, and there's a 5-stop change. It goes from 16 to a 2.8,
right.
And it's like at 52-19. So you need a film stock with incredible latitude, or you're just out of luck. So
right.
And then I wanted to, there's a lot of nights in a bank robbery movie. So I wanted it to be the same grain feeling. It pays off. I mean, it's like, I remember indelibly, I was in the DI at Molinaire in London, and we had shot a few shots. We shot a few shots digitally just because there was one location that I simply I wasn't allowed to control the light in at all. So, and it was a super dark parking structure. So I ended up having to shoot some of it at 1600 ASA on digital in order to get an image. And we grained it up and made it match the 52-19. But whenever you flip between the two, whenever you cut in between the two, I remember the colorist saying, "Oh my God, film is so beautiful." Like, yeah.
Right, with that quick contrast, and you can see it right there.
It's just there's that transportive thing where you're in a graphic realm that you're just not in the digital world. In the digital world, we had to go to great lengths to make it graphic. We had to try to erase that hyper real feeling of it. That's, as soon as the digital world started, everybody started looking for the worst lenses possible, so that you could erase reality. Let's find some old Kawas that have been in storage in Moscow for 40 years. Anything to give it a graphic presentation. But film has that. It's just there. You don't have to butcher it. It's there from the very beginning. It looks like reality, and you accept it as reality, but you've actually been transported into a movie. You're actually in a make-believe place, and you accept it, and you relax. You give up you suspend your disbelief. The audience relaxes because they know they're in good hands, and that's a tough thing. That's a tough thing to fight. It's like producers are always shoving me away from film. It's like, we don't get to I had a producer recently say, "But I don't see the dailies for a day. That means I got to leave the sets up for an extra day." I'm going, you're 70 years old, dude, and I know you know how to do this.
Right.
You're saying you can't remember 5 years ago? It's like, come on. Well, are you going to take the sets down? Quit it. Cut it out.
Right.
I know we've already gone away from the car chase scenes, but I am a little bit interested, and maybe this is more of a producer's job, but you must have had entire areas of a city just like closed down while you're shooting, right?
There is a location award. The Locations Union gives an award for best locations, and if this movie doesn't win, then I'm gonna start writing angry letters.
Well, what constitutes like getting the award? What makes like a spot great?
For any chase scene through a city as complicated as Atlanta, we put up maps on the wall, and they were color-coded maps. So for chase scene number 1, which would be in red, we would have this one block for that run. You turn a corner, and over in another part of the city, there's the second block. And then you turn a corner, and then over in another part of the city, there's another block. And then in another part of the city, there's an alley. And then in another part of the city, there's a parking structure. And, in a 10-minute, or actually the first chase scene is probably 5 minutes long. You're using up 25 streets. So all that has to be woven in together, coordinated, and shot on different days, and figured out and shot with 2 different units, returned, scouted numerous times, half a dozen times, and by 2 different units.
What do you mean by units?
By first unit and the stunt unit.
Okay, right.
I'm running through there with the actors in the Biscuit, which is where we take a car and take the wheels off and put it on a 6-wheeled vehicle driven by a incredible stunt driver, Rob Nagel, with a 400 horsepower engine, which can go 120 miles an hour and do...
It seems like a lame name for something like that, a Biscuit.
The Biscuit?
Yeah.
I never even thought of that. Once you see the Biscuit, it's like you'll never think about biscuits.
Yeah, anyway. Sure.
It's a monster. When you see it racing through a city street and spinning around and racing down another street. Anyway, the interior shots with all the actors were shot on that sort of vehicle. That's my job. Mm-hmm. The exterior shots, car to car, that's almost always the stunt unit. That's Russian arms and other camera vehicles chasing cars down the same streets, but on a different day.
Right.
And the lighting has to be the same?
The lighting has to be the same, but more importantly, the backgrounds have to be the same.
Right.
When I'm looking at the actor behind him, those buildings, parked cars, all that has to be, the parked cars have to be put back in the same place. The people walking on the street have to be the same.
Wow.
Everything. Your lighting is
probably
your
the easy
least
part.
controllable
Yeah.
thing.
Right.
But
You can't have like a hot dog cart show up in the middle of the scene that wasn't there before, that kind of stuff.
Well, it's also, you just got to close it off because you're racing down these streets at 60 to 100 miles an hour, so and smashing cars, so everything has to be completely controlled,
right,
including all the pedestrians and so forth. That's why I'm just talking about the locations. Just think about, you have to have somebody in the doorway of every building. Nobody can step out the building and into the middle of a car chase. It's just the logistics of all that were phenomenal. And you're only going to get one block. They're only going to give you one block.
Right.
And then they gave us for the first time, and maybe the last time, they gave us their main freeway, the 85-75 freeway, which is the one recently where a bridge collapsed.
Oh, right.
You saw it on the news.
Atlanta, yeah.
It's one of the busiest freeways in the country, if not, it's like the 405 kind of. And they gave us that freeway as a running roadblock where a phalanx of cops are in front of us, a phalanx of cops are behind us, and they're holding people back, and we're driving a controlled pod. All the cars next to us are ours. All the cars on the right and left are ours, and we're all peeling down the road at 60 to 100 miles an hour with cops in front of us and back of us.
There's no pressure there, though.
Right.
And then everybody turns around and goes back and does it again.
Wow.
Again, and they, you know, they're like, okay, we will give you 3 hours. And you've got, you know, just an incredible number of shots to do in those 3 hours. So
Better turn that focus
requires,
up, yeah. I'm
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. It's a lot of thinking about it, working, get out your map, get out your little toy cars, go through it again and again with everybody watching, then roll through it with no control, just everybody driving it in civilian cars, everybody getting used to it. It's laborious. I've never did so many location scouts on any of the movies. I would almost say something crazy like I did more on this movie than all the other movies ever put together that I ever did.
Wow.
I don't know. I can't even imagine how many Edgar did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I did, you know. We were still scouting, of course, while we were making movies every weekend. We spent still scouting, still looking. You still go by every location. Every weekend was spent rehearsing and revisiting the locations. Things change all the time, and you have new ideas.
Right. Now, do you prefer, as a cinematographer, an experience like that to maybe something like The Matrix, where you're shooting a lot of green screen, a lot of special effects? I mean, this is all practical. You're out in environments. You've got, you know, and then you've got The Matrix with a lot more special effects and digital effects and all that kind of stuff. Like, how do you approach it differently each challenge?
I just like making a good story.
Right.
I don't really.
You don't have to pick.
Yeah. It's not a pick necessarily, but like, how do you approach each one differently? Like when you're shooting The Matrix, a lot of times you're shooting scenes in an environment that you can't even see. So how do you approach that versus something like Baby Driver?
Yeah, actually, people have a misconception about The Matrix. I mean, I know what you're talking about. I did do a movie that was called The Spirit with Frank Miller, in which all the walls were green, and all we did was build the floors and the furniture, and the walls weren't there. But you did have floors and furniture and grass and trees and things that actors touched. You're not lost. You're not just in a green world. The Matrix, the only virtual environments are the squiddies. Otherwise, there's only like 25 visual effects shots in the first Matrix. The second Matrix movies, again, I can't remember a single green screen world. I just don't think it existed. We built just about everything. Even on Jungle Book, in which I made it first in a computer, I still shot it on a stage with sets.
So, like in The Matrix, the scene where like Neo fights all of the other Agent Smiths, and all like,
that was on a set.
Oh.
That's like
that was on a set, and we had 12 guys dressed as Agent Smith, and they all went to Agent Smith school. They all learned how to walk and talk like Hugo. They were all had their heads shaved like Hugo. By the way, the guy doing Neo, the guy playing Neo, is the director of John Wick.
Huh.
And
really,
one of the Agent Smiths is the director of whatever the new Charlize Theron movie is.
Atomic Blonde.
Atomic Blonde, yeah.
Huh.
So those stunt people have gone on to become directors in their own right. And the other one was another one was Darren, who was the second unit director and stunt coordinator on Baby Driver.
Nice. That's awesome.
Breeding
awesome.
Directors. Yeah.
Yeah.
And exactly. So
You're training them well.
Any director likes to have other filmmakers around them. You don't want a piece of meat who's not going to give you an opinion. You want people who are smart and are contributing all the time. And obviously, Chad and Darren and all those guys were smart as whips, and they were always contributing. They were always saying we could do this, we could do this. They're working out the fight sequences. They're helping you make the movie.
Right.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, all that fight scene with the thousands of Agent Smiths was we built an entire city block on a airport hangar in Alameda, and lit it and held it lit for weeks and shot that sequence.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, when you're doing a sequence like so, some of those really incredible action sequences, the final showdown on the Matrix, the train sequence in Spider-Man 2. As the cinematographer, how much are you involved in envisioning that stuff right from the start? I mean, are you doing storyboards with the directors? Like, how do some of those really complicated scenes come together?
Sometimes, sometimes I help with storyboards. Certainly the storyboards are fed to me as early as possible for my feedback. But a lot of times, like Edgar starts doodling on paper, pretty final. It pops out of Edgar's head. He knows shots start coming out, even though they're stick figures. I could use those storyboards and make a movie with it. And then they're given to a storyboard artist who fleshes them out so that they look professional, and the average crew member looks at them and knows what they're doing. They're a communication tool. They come right out of the director's head, and they should come out of the director's head. They're run by me, and I contribute to them, but there's a few times when I've done them from scratch, and I've certainly done movies where I show up and do the shot lists. But that's just the director asks you to do that, or the director has other concerns. And some directors are good with some kinds of scenes, and they're not good with other kinds of scenes. So you'll do the boards for the action scenes, and they'll do the boards for the acting scenes, or vice versa. Or they know one scene, they've dreamt it, they've got it in their heads, and they got another one, they're like, I don't quite know how we're going to do this, and that's when you jump in.
I mean, have you ever gotten a storyboard and you're like, yeah, that's not possible?
All the time.
That's why it would be good for you to be like there saying, hey, put the brakes on that one.
or this is not really clear. I think the beat you're going for is this, and it can be done this way. What do you think of this option?
Right.
Or even this option. They go, oh, yeah, it's much better. It's much cleaner. Mm-hmm. Or whatever. Or no, I like mine because it has this. It's just you're just a sounding board. You're just bouncing things back and forth. And in a way, I'm the first person to see the movie. So I'm the first audience member. And I often say to directors, when I start to look, I can be really annoying because I'm just going to say what's in my head. I'm not going to filter it too much. I'm going to be direct feedback to you because I feel like that's my job.
Yeah.
And if you get annoyed with me and tell me to fuck off, I don't take it personally, completely. But I'm not going to stop.
Right.
Right.
That's just because otherwise I'm not doing my job.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What looking at what's coming up next for you? We've got Baby Driver coming out June 28th. Everybody go see it. It sounds incredible. Megan and I will be in line, ready to go.
Awesome.
I'm going to drive really fast to get there.
Right. We're paying for it with a bank we just robbed. What's on the horizon? What's coming up next?
I'm going to go off to London to do a movie with Joe Cornish, the director of Attack the Block. This one's called The Kid Who Would Be King, and it takes place in London now. As Joe has a regular radio show in London. It's quite famous comedy and radio show, and Joe likes to introduce the movie as when Britain is torn, when Britain is leaderless, when times are terrible, when no one can trust anyone else, the sword will arise. And what it is this 12-year-old kid pulls Excalibur out of a stone in a construction site, and it's Excalibur, and just bad things happen. And he's just a regular school kid in his school uniform, and he's 12 years old, and he and his friends, his other 12-year-old friends, have to defend England against the forces of evil.
Awesome.
That sounds great.
It's pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah, that sounds. I will be waiting in line for that as well.
I'm sure you will.
So I want to end on just kind of one last question. It seems like you're looking through the filmography, the work you do, like action, adventure, genre films are things that are close to your heart, things that you keep coming back to. What is it about the types of films that you've been doing that's pulled you back, and what are you trying to deliver to an audience through the cinematography and the films you're making?
Wow. As Edgar says, the only sin a filmmaker can make is to be boring. That's the only unforgivable sin. So action adventure is a visceral, very visceral, transportive form of entertainment. It's very primal. It's very, you feel it in your body as well as your mind. Your mind's trying to figure out the problems, and your body's feeling the roller coaster that it's on. So that always moves me. That's one of the basic things movies can do is take you places. They can take you to locations. They can put you into adventures that you would not ordinarily be in. I'm also drawn as a viewer and as a filmmaker to personal, internal voyages as well, adventures. I went last night to see Brie Larson's movie, which is called The Unicorn Store, and it's a girl, college girl, who comes home and loves to play with unicorns, and she goes to buy a unicorn. And it's really a psychological story, and yet it is as moving and as exciting as a car chase. So I would love to do those kinds of stories as well. So
Excellent.
You can do an internal, I look at Her and the movie Her, where's the action in that?
Right.
It's really, I love that movie. You can't stop looking at it. And it's all internal. It's literally like a voiceover and a guy's face.
Right.
It's super thrilling to me. It's like beautiful filmmaking. Or take an Ozu movie in which the camera doesn't move at all and people just move back and forth. And he's one of my favorite filmmakers, period. I like all sorts of movies. I love to tell them, but because The Matrix made me known, people always think of me as that guy. They don't remember that I also did Clueless.
Right.
I didn't forget that.
Yep.
And honestly, 100 years from now, I suspect Clueless will be the movie that lives on out of all the ones I ever did.
Army of Darkness, too. That'll
Army of Darkness.
It'll never be forgotten.
No,
Josh is a huge fan.
Yep. I just went and saw it on 35 millimeter like 2 weeks ago.
Where?
Here in Rochester, they showed it at Saturday Night Rewind, which is like they show like all kinds of cool genre films, and it was like Army of Darkness on 35 millimeter. The theater was packed. People were dressed up. It was such a good time.
I know those school screens are. I went to one in Toronto, and little kids came with one arm and a chainsaw and stuff.
Yeah.
Really, paper mache chainsaws. It was like, God, it just never stops.
Nope.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know it's a
The other thing to
masterpiece?
remember about the Matrix movies is those are the last movies. Oh, that's not true. I finished Team America on film in the chemical process through a lab. The three Matrix were done on film, finished in a lab, printed on film. It never went to the digital process.
Wow.
There was no DIs and those things. So
Right. Yeah. I think even myself, like you think of them as such a special effects driven movie that I think you're right. There is a little bit of a misunderstanding of how those were made, and we're so used to green screen and stuff now that it's almost like you're like, oh well, it must have been. It had to be.
Mm-hmm.
we couldn't afford it. all those bullet time shots were shot in one morning.
Wow.
Yep.
That's all we could afford.
Right. And it
That
still
was our
holds
only
up.
green screen stage.
Oh yeah. I just watched The Matrix last night, and I was like, this could have came out like yesterday, easily.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny.
It's
If
held
you
up.
look closely, every one of those bullet time moves is the same. The camera makes the same move because we could only afford one rig and one morning to do them. So if it's on the rooftop, if it's in the subway, no matter where the bullet time occurs, the camera makes the same journey around the actors.
Well,
That's how cheap it was.
don't tell people that.
We had $45 million to make that movie.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, Bill, nobody is going to accuse you of being boring. We're big fans of your work. We look forward to seeing Baby Driver and the next film you have coming up. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Josh and Megan, thank you very much.
It is a great satisfaction to be able to speak to you through the medium of this wonderful invention.